We're going to start with state management and looking at the problem of state with web pages. This comes from chapter 8 of our text, and in reality, in a web site, each web page is separate from the other, and there's no connection between the two from one page to another. What we have to do is actually create the illusion that multiple independent web pages are connected by being very careful how we pass data between them. This actually extends into a single web page in that whenever we click a button or go back to the server, we lose the state information for a single web page, and that's where view state comes in. View state isn't used that much. We won't use it to move data from one page to the other, but it is sometimes used, frequently used, to keep data within a page. Let's look at a quick example to motivate this. This is the example right from the textbook, chapter 8 examples. I'll post a link to that if you don't have the full source code from the textbook. But this is a simple page with a text box and two buttons, and one button, the Save Content button, will simply copy the contents of the text box into a variable, and then the Load button will load in, grab that variable, and move it into the text box. So we'd expect this to work very easily, where we can view a page. Let me go back and run this. So here we can type in our test message. We'd like to save that content, and it'll save it into a variable, and we'd like to load in that content, and it'll copy that variable back into our text box. But it doesn't work, and the problem is that as soon as we hit one of these buttons that goes back to the server, these are server control buttons, we lose our local variables. Our page is reloaded, and our local variables are erased. So we have to use view state, and view state is just a collection of data that we can stick in there, and we use it in different ways to store stuff in the view state. We say view state, and then we attach some flag, some tag to this where this is going to be stored, and then we store the contents. So it's pretty common to use if we're going to store a variable in the view state, to use that variable name as the tag for this. So this copies contents into the view state, and then here when the page is reloaded, we grab that view state and we look up the contents, and we set our variable back to this. So these two routines, one in page load and one in page pre-render, manage the view state and copy this variable into this view state, and then when the page is reloaded, copies it back. You notice this if this is post back. So this code is only done when the page is reloaded. So the first time the page is loaded, this isn't done. But then we will save the view state during the pre-render stage, and then when the page is reposted back, we will copy the view state back into this content. So now that I've uncommented this out, I can run this again, and I can type in my test message. I can then save the contents, and it'll be put in the view state, and when I hit load, it'll copy it out of the view state and back in the text box, into the content variable for us. So basically, as stated in Microsoft, the view state is really used to preserve page and control values between round trips. That's when we go back to the server and come back. Here we use them in different ways, especially with complicated web pages where you're storing data in variables, not just in the controls themselves. The information in each control will stay there, but if you copy that information into a variable or an array, that array or variable will go away, and then we have to use view states to bring it back. Let's look at another quick example of where you might save some state information from one page load to another. So this is the counter example from the textbook. We just have a button with a label, and every time we click the button we're going to add 1 to whatever is in the label. So if we look at that, I modified this code a little bit from what's in the textbook. But again, when we click on the button, we have a counter variable that we declare above, and we add 1 to it. And then I check if the first time the page is loaded, so if this is not a postback, then we're going to set the counter equal to 1. So the first time the page is loaded, we set the counter equal 1, and we display that in the in the label. Then whenever we click the button, we add 1 to the counter and display that in the label. Now this isn't going to work because the variable counter is not remembered from one click of the button to another. If you watch the refresh, we refresh the page every time real quickly, and so it erases all the local variables. So then let's look at using a session state, a view state to hold this. So now we've just made a couple changes to this. When the page is loaded, we again check if it's the first time this page is loaded, and if so, again we still set counter to 1. But we also store that information in the view state. Again, remember the view state is what we call a dictionary data type, so we just have to give everything we store in there a tag or a name. So we're going to use the name counter, and then we're just going to store the counter variable in the view state with that tag. Similarly, whenever we increment the counter, whenever we change the counter, we also are going to save it to the view state with that same tag. So we're going to save the counter to the view state in that same tag. Now, when the page is reloaded, so this is a postback, we're going to grab the view state using that same tag, counter tag, and set the variable counter equal to that. So we'll maintain counter state from one place to the other. Every time we change it, we're going to save it out to the view state, and then when we reload the page, we're going to grab it from the view state and save its variable into the local variable. So now when we run this, it'll just increment the counter. So again, we can increment the counter, and every time the page is loaded, so when we push the button, it increments and saves it to the view state, and it reloads the page and grabs that view state. You might ask, how is the view state set or stored from one place to the other? And let me just pull up the source code for this. So Microsoft ASP sticks in a hidden input field here called view state, and the information is stored in that view state in this value. This is hidden variable, so it doesn't show up in our page, but this is passed back and forth. You should be aware that view state stuff, although this looks encrypted, it is not really secure, so you do have to do some additional stuff if you want to make the view state secure. But generally, with page information, you may not be storing confidential information in the view state. If you do, you have to just be careful for that. And your textbook would walk you through how to manage and make that more secure. So we won't talk about making the view state secure, but there are ways of doing that that you can look in the textbook up. So that wraps up the view state. Now we're going to look at the session variables and using the session to store information from one page to another, not just within reloads of the same page.